I want to live and explore what I call the thin edge. The thin edge is a tailspin of a variety of destructive forces that compound one another and lead to a tighter and tighter spin towards dissociation, destruction, insanity, pain, dishonor, violation, violence, and it's an unregulated process. It's much like an untuned instrument. There's some part of the consciousness trying to wake up. It's plucking on the strings, trying to feel something, trying to wake up. And yet what's being woken up into is something that's very complex. It's beyond the synthesizing capacity of the emotionally illiterate human being, the traumatically illiterate human being in a traumatically illiterate culture. So there's this dissonant noise as we wake up, and there's a desire to escape and go back to sleep, and yet this pattern batters away on the psyche, batters away on the culture, showing up in a variety of horrifying statistics that are never pieced and put together in the shape capable of revealing what's going on. So we have this wedge shape as each of these factors, like different strings, like different strands of the pattern, all come from a different angle but converge on this one point in the fragility of the cultured mind. The first part of this wedge down into this narrow vortex is regression. Now, regression happens whenever there is a traumatic history that is unresolved. And this is our history. A traumatic history that has not been resolved nationally, in the family system, or as individuals. In a cult of denial, you have a bifurcation of events, and the socially accepted version of reality is dissociated from the politically incorrect details and data points in the pattern, to split reality into a fictitious version and a shadow-suppressed version of reality. So you've now split and weakened the self. And in the weakened shadow self, all the traumatic events, all the horror, all the fear, all the grief, all the loneliness, all the unintegrated energy is present, and it's partitioned off. And the deified cartoon-like version of the cult is projected and exalted as we talk with great refinement about the weather, about brands of clothing and other nonsense that have very little to do with the underlying area of well-being. Now, the next part of this blade, going down to this fine point, is a very deep level of chauvinism. Here we have, again, a splitting of the self. Now, with every split, if you imagine an integrated woven thread, an integrated woven fabric being pulled apart thread by thread, we have a weakening, we have a dissolution. Now, in chauvinism, half of the psyche is dishonored. Chauvinism is the elevation of the masculine in all of its principles and dimensions, and the diminishment of the feminine in men and in women. So giving, masculine, is elevated. Receiving, feminine, is diminished. Speaking, elevated, is masculine. Listening is diminished as feminine. Meeting someone's need is elevated as masculine. Being needy is diminished as feminine. Knowing something is elevated as masculine. Not knowing something is diminished as feminine. Knowledge as masculine is elevated. The unknown as feminine is diminished. Light as masculine is elevated. Darkness is diminished. Object is elevated. The void, the space around the object, is diminished. Sound is elevated. Silence is diminished. Busyness is elevated. Being still is diminished. Initiation, let's do this, is elevated. Responsiveness diminished. Leadership is elevated. Following is diminished. Men are elevated. Females are diminished. The masculine stage of life in peak outer activity is elevated. The feminine stages of infancy and old age are diminished. Thoughts and actions are elevated. Feelings, as the feminine, is diminished. The entire psyche, in every dynamic, meaning every single one of these dynamics, is a synergy, a flow. Between speaking and listening, you have communication. You do not get communication without speaking. You do not get communication without listening. When you devalue listening as a cult dogma and elevate speaking, you get a nation of speakers who can't hear one another, and you get a fragmentation of communication. No scientist can demonstrate why listening is less important than speaking, or why speaking is less important than listening in communication. It is only cult dogma that is expressed in 10,000 different ways, not the least of which having groups that will teach you how to speak, with no groups that will teach you how to listen. This is a natural fallout of a deep cult bias in which the psyche in men and women is split in half, and those who represent the most feminine elements in the cult are diminished, patronized, used, made to feel invisible in a cult that shines its spotlight squarely on masculine traits. This violates half of every human being, half of every psyche. And with that dishonor, with that invisibility, with that diminishment, with that insanity, because when someone gives you a battery with a positive and a negative polarity and tells you that the positive charge on the battery is more valuable than the negative charge in the battery, they are pathologically insane. And fortunately, in the domain of materialism, external and masculine, relative to internal, subjective and feminine, Fortunately, in materialism, we are not quite that dumb as to produce batteries with an excessive positive charge and no negative charge to balance it. Fortunately, in sex, we are not so stupid as to believe that the man is more valuable than the women. But these small pockets of sanity are few and far between in a dogmatic, chauvinistic cult that is committed to the dissonance of 10,000 memes a day that make absolutely no sense and weaken the psyche. Emotional illiteracy is a direct fallout from the chauvinism that will send you to school to learn how to think, but not how to feel. This is a stunning oversight for any scientist looking from the outside. Do you mean to say that there is an entire species that has been produced by nature that is focusing on the right side more than the left? Do you mean to say that there is a species of tree that, growing naturally and symmetrically in all directions, goes to a tree school and learns to cut off all the branches on the left side and overdevelop the branches on the right side, and then proceeds to fall over in increased numbers and doesn't grasp the connection between this asymmetry? This is a stunning thing to behold. I thought nature knew what it was doing, producing millions of different species. How did these idiots get to be as prominent as they are? Are they a cancer that, dissociating from the host body of which they are a part, is rapidly reproducing in chaotic frenzy to that wonderful crescendo of killing off its host, only to subside quickly after the murder of its mother? You see, that is the path of cancer. Discordant, dissociative, rapid replication out of attunement of the host body, creating disorder, disease, until the host body collapses, and the moment of triumph for the cancer, right? Hooray, we have the whole body to ourselves. We won, we won. We beat the organizing principle of our host. But where's all our blood supply going? I mean, the very next thing to die after the host body is the cancer. It is not intelligent design. Emotional illiteracy is a violation of the principle of balance, symmetry, which is a violation of the principle of grace, which is the violation and ignorance about the most elegant shape in the universe, which is the sphere, not the half sphere. Hence tires that are round rather than the bumpy ride that we insist on creating for ourselves when we cut our minds in half. Emotional illiteracy equals a violation of the sphere, equals pain. It also equals stupidity. Every single thought and every single action in human history has been fueled, has been initiated through the compelling biological force of the chemicals that combine to create movement in the emotional body. Be it anger, hate, terror, loneliness, rage, joy, fear of the unknown, fear of feeling. A little bit of a tongue twister in the emotional psyche. Fear of feeling produces thought and action. Thought and action which shape our world to an alarming degree. Emotional illiteracy is much like physiological illiteracy. If you don't know what this is, if you don't know what causes pain and what brings well-being physically, you will mangle and kill off your body. We do some basic physiological training. We learn a few things. Emotions, however, are shamed, silenced, taboo, lied about, and lectured to. You see, no intelligent farmer, an orange grove grower in Florida, goes out at 4 a.m, sees that in late February, the thermometer is dropping to 28 degrees. And millions of dollars of one of the most sensitive crops in the country on his farm alone is in jeopardy. No farmer lectures the thermometer. Not one is that asinine to shout at the thermometer, come on, you can do it. Go up to 32. This is a valuable orange crop. But parents around the country lecture their shamed, terrified, traumatized children constantly to feel better about sick, stupid, and sociopathic experiences that produce a low temperature reading in the human heart, just like they have done in the biology, in the mathematics of the human heart throughout history, and we are too dumb to do anything about it. This stupidity, this illiteracy, and shaming of the instrument that is designed to give us data is a profound violation of science, of intelligence, of humanity, and the feminine. It escalates pain, confusion, and dissonance and goes towards this narrow blade. This narrow blade that threatens to move from being an ally of attunement, grace, and creativity into an instrument of self-destruction. This creates grief, a complex biological process. As the body goes through trauma, as the body dies to a certain part of itself, a certain part of the possibility is raped and murdered by chauvinism. You can be everything you want to be except happy, except integrated, except sane, except intelligent, except honest, except sane. There's not a lot left. And as these parts of the possibility and probability field die in a corrupt and shame-based cult that punishes you with traumatic events, exclusion, and terror for stepping out of line, a line that leads straight to the soup kitchen of mediocrity, to the addictive path of constantly distracting and numbing the increasing amounts of pain produced on a daily basis. Grief goes through a process from denial. It's too big to face. There's death. There's a shift. I can't face that. Anger. Why is this stuff going on? Bargaining. Self-pity. Why is this happening to me? Self-absorbed. Grief has a whole series of biological steps that represent, in a microcosm, the species' response to all these different states. And finally, releases these chemicals out of the body. Except our cult has a taboo wall against grief. So these chemicals compound and build up to explosive, confusing, toxic levels that adds to the noise. The dissonance of an instrument we don't know how to play. Cultural ignorance. Well, we're going through all this personally. At the same time, we are surrounded by an inane cult that has no more clue about how to honor and deal with these various travesties, crises, insanities, and just collisions and collusions within the self that are tearing the self apart. Cultural ignorance and chauvinism, as we go through this most monumental crisis, mean that we have a choice that is no choice at all. On the one hand, we can witness ourselves being torn apart mentally, emotionally, physically, financially, as the left hand refuses to coordinate with the right hand, and we feel somewhat crazy. A good sign that we can still recognize and diagnose the disease. There is invisibility. How are you doing? I'm fine. Oh, how lovely. How are you doing? I'm fine. Oh, how lovely. There is invisibility. None of this is articulated in even the most basic way. And in this collusion of lies is institutionalized dishonor and disrespect for what? For the feminine at every level. For the truth, for ourselves, for anything real, for integrity. How are you? I'm fine is the institutionalization of colluding to hide the brutality, the insanity, the trauma, the cruelty, and the grief of our cult, even as the smokestacks keep churning away, polluting our lungs with one layer after another of toxicity, compounding in the air, 50,000 chemicals, each infant born with a higher chemical load. You can't find a person on the planet these days who is not carrying C8, a birth defect courtesy of DuPont and their choice to save money on Teflon. and their choice to cover it up. On the other hand, you can tell the truth in our cult. How you doing? Well, let's start by making a 3-hour time window. Oh my goodness, I don't want to make a 3-hour time window. I didn't even want you to answer the question. Well, you did ask the question, and it is going to take 3 hours, so shut the fuck up and actually be one decent human being in the entire cult and listen. That's when you get the shifty eyes. In an abuse cult, if you agree to be invisible, you are colluding with the silence and shame of I don't matter enough to exist. Choice number 1. Or you set yourself up for betrayal, abuse, and abandonment. If you decide to honor yourself. In a cult, that rather than acknowledging the embarrassment that with this amount of land, this amount of money, the same amount of time that every cult in human history has had available to it, you can go through an entire year in this cult without one human being seeing or being seen once at a meaningful level. That is the shame and incompetence of a cult that is too juvenile to recognize the value of half of the sphere. We got it wrong right out the bat by dividing the whole into good and evil without the sophistication of understanding that everything is toxic at one dose and medicinal at another. That everything helps life grow in certain contexts and destroys life in others. That no energy is created or destroyed, it simply changes form and evolves with time. In this level between carrying the embarrassment on behalf of the cult, that no one in the cult has allocated time to see and be seen in anything but the most superficially cult choreographed ways. We choose to give the shame back to those who don't know how to hold it and respond. They don't know what they're doing any more than you do. Or pretend everything's fine. This does not lead to integration, sanity, truth, or anything intelligent. It leads to the mask of lies, which becomes part of this narrow thread. It's very difficult to respond effectively to crisis and trauma through a mask of lies. Luckily, being good materialists, we don't ask our doctors to diagnose our diseases physically, which show up in great abundance in a cult which won't deal with its diseases mentally and emotionally. Trauma leads to sociopathic, self-absorbed coping mechanisms. That's what the reptilian brainstem, with its fight, flight, and freeze protocols, was designed for. How do you respond to a traumatic environment in a culture that is emotionally illiterate? Well, a sociopathic, emotionally illiterate, chauvinistic, materialist cult leads to trauma and violation predictably, inevitably, repeatedly, and is too dumb to repair the damage it causes on a daily basis. When you go online and find everything under the sun that you don't need and cannot find sane love and belonging anywhere, it is a violation of sanity. You need to understand what's going on inside of you more than you need a new car, more than you need anything else. And it is not available in your neighborhood. Why not? Why isn't the nexus of every neighborhood the sanity, emotional technology, and integration building? Why? Makes sense? Every action in human history, emotionally based? Everything that's ever fucked you up, emotionally based? I know. Let's have an education system that takes people from kindergarten through college without a single hour of emotional literacy. No science, no common sense, no discussion about feelings. That'll really fuck people up, won't it? Let's see, everything they're doing about their feelings. No one has a clue what their feelings are, feel their feelings are bad, and don't know what to do with them. Brilliant. How do you fuck? How else could we fuck up, the few people that survive? Well, of course, we should shame and bully those who are sensitive and have more feelings than others. That'll teach them. Let's then belittle them on television, right? Oh, they're so dumb. They had feelings. Aren't they dumb? This is a powder keg of self-hatred. But it is called culture and education. Let's rewire. You see, if we were at this level of cruelty when it came to dynamite and poison and stuff like that, and we sold poison labeled as cough medicine, we would all be physically dead. We sold dynamite as cigarettes. That would be a great one, wouldn't it? Just label dynamite as cigarettes. This is what we do when we cross-wire definitions of abuse and love and trauma and for your own good. We label the psyche, the most explosive dynamics of pain, trauma, and violation, as if somehow these are good things to ingest. It's bad things to talk about in a shame-based cult, but good things to ingest. When other people are traumatized and do not get help, they enter a sociopathic state in which they traumatize other people who then don't get helped, who enter a sociopathic state, and like anything else, the meme, the virus of chauvinism and emotional literacy spreads, and it becomes part of this thin blade. And the thin blade asks a question: will you wake up? Will you stumble out of the dream and respond? Or will you be cut to pieces as the blade saws away at your lifeblood. But we're not even done with all the different vectors that form this blade. Cultural amnesia of the pains and traumas in our past trickles down to family amnesia about the sexual abuses, the violence, the addictions, the rages, and the insanity in the family, which trickles down into the individual who is left to feel through the silence in the circle around them that all of the cruelty, all of the rage, all of the loneliness, and all of the pain that is throbbing through their body like an untrained, untuned, discordant instrument is all about them. The problem is they're unlovable. They're unwanted. They don't deserve love. That's the problem. These lies reverberate in the isolation of shame, in the dissociation of I don't belong, and reinitiate the trauma of loneliness in a biological framework in which we are interdependent with the planet and interdependent with one another and have every reason to fear for our lives. If we believe we do not belong, are not worthy of the love just because people in an emotionally illiterate, chauvinistic cult are incapable of knowing the difference between love and abuse. Every conscious being who tunes into their feminine side feels this sawing motion of this blade cutting away at their being, severing the self into two dissociated parts. And the grief and the pain and the howl that in every sociopathic cult has no place to be honored. Because as soon as you honor the howl, you honor the truth. As soon as you honor the truth, you discover the lies. As soon as you discover the lies, you destroy the cult that fosters such abuse. As soon as you destroy the cult, you are faced with the chaos of the beautiful unknown and the terrifying unknown that is the feminine void of all possibility. And faced with the responsibility for engaging with that void, we collapse in the absence of confidence with no experience for navigating that sea of possibility, with a heart that has been finely tuned with the feedback, with the dance of communication, with the elements, with our body, and with one another, to reap and realize the harvest of beauty that is as present in the unknown as the harvest of terror. Terror is the encounter with the unknown with no emotional competency, no sanity in a sociopathic state. Beauty, truth, and goodness marks the encounter with the same ocean of possibility when we know what the fuck we're doing. We retreat into the dismal mediocrity of our cult, not because it has much to offer, but because of the terror of encountering the truth in the disabled state in which we have been produced in a cult that fails to teach emotional literacy, that fails to include the most relevant subjects of our lives. From the practical, like learning to drive a car, build a house, cook a good food, have a good diet, have excellent communication, make love and transcendent moments sustainably and with honor to another human being. This is all impossible to comprehend. Such sanity makes no sense in a cult that begins by cutting the self in half and pitting one half against the other.